Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Zoning Review Committee meeting for February 7th, 2024. This meeting is being conducted remotely online through the Zoom meeting app, and public participation is encouraged through the app or by phone. This is in accordance with the extension of the COVID pandemic provisions allowing remote public meetings by the General Court through March 31st, 2025 per Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. So we've got a quorum, so I guess we can go ahead and begin. First on the agenda is a quick review of the economic feasibility analysis. And Eric, I'll give this to you to bring us up to date.
Sure. We had let's, I guess, back up and explain some of the need for this. The state, who is reviewing the community's response to the MBTA community's legislation, so we submitted our zoning bylaw amendment, requires communities to submit an economic feasibility analysis that helps illustrate the lack of negative impact of going beyond 10% inclusionary requirements for affordability for those zoning districts. As anybody that's been following along with the Zoning Review Committee's development of that language, the committee's come up with what I would consider a very appropriate 12.5%. It's a developer-friendly number. That means that 1 out of every 8 units that could get constructed would have to be affordable. We applied for technical assistance funding. I believe we got that funding from Mass Housing Partnership, and that funding got applied to RKG Associates, who then looked up market data within our community to essentially run a financial forecast about what the profitability would be for projects if they included the 12.5% inclusionary requirement, and came up with a comfortable margin that helps support the town's request for 12.5%. So I would anticipate that the state should not have any problems with accepting the requested increase above 10%. I could bring up on screen, but it's kind of a boring report. There are some illustrations that illustrate, some of the profitability, but generally speaking, I would consider it to be not that entertaining or informative with regards to being on screen. However, when the town launches its new website, that'll be one of the things that gets provided to the public as a document along with our draft zoning bylaw.
Okay. Any questions from anybody on the board?
So we're just waiting to hear back from them. Are we going to hear separately from that, or is that?
I would anticipate that we'll hear from them all together with regards to an acceptance of that, but considering the threshold or the criteria that they set for justifying an increase over the 10%, knock on wood, I don't want to jinx it, but I would anticipate no difficulties accepting that number in the zoning language. I will note too, though, although the state, meaning the agency at the state, is the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, they're the ones that ultimately need to determine whether the community, an MBTA community, is in compliance with the legislation. They're the ones doing the initial review for 90 days of the submitted language. I have been in touch with the Attorney General's office about other matters, and they had submitted or a request or an offer for any communities that wanted to submit their language for a preliminary non-committal review. So I took advantage of that and sent it over to them as well. So hopefully we'll get to hear from, I think we might end up hearing from the AG's office before EOHLC, only because I don't think all the communities were aware of the AG's office's offer.
Thank you.
So this is a separate filing besides the MBTA communities then?
I'm not sure what you mean by a separate filing. So it's all the same language. So I submitted the same material to the AG's office as I did to the state for a review. It's just 2 separate entities that are going to provide feedback. So the lens with which the EOHLC is going to look at it is through compliance. Well, it's almost the same lens. Is through the compliance with the guidelines that EOHLC has provided. And I would say the AG's office is probably going to be looking at it a little bit more broadly to make sure that it's in compliance with fair housing and anything else that might be problematic with regards to enforcing it or avoiding any conflicting language or difficulty for enforcement. So it's just good to have 2 separate perspectives on the language to provide us with some guidance on any potential tweaks.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Now let's move on to the next agenda item, which is a review zoning amendment priorities for May 24th and October 24th town meetings. The following topics have been listed as either moving forward, pending support from the planning board, under review with town council, or working with the Barrett Planning Group. So once again, Eric, I'll turn this over to you to, we can go
Sure.
through each one of them.
I'll preface this with an apology. I don't want it to feel too repetitive. I know that the zoning review committee has gone over a lot of these items on the list in general, and has deferred to other boards, specifically the planning board on some. But I didn't want to leave them off on the discussion. We can skip over them or just confirm that that's where they're going to be at. I didn't want to provide or cause any confusion about whether or not things have dropped off the list. I also wanted to get the zoning review committee's general perception or agreement that although we have the most important amendments to be proposed in the spring is MBTA communities, Tyngsborough, along with a couple of other communities, do have other zoning amendments that are going to be on the warrant. I would consider most of these to be relatively low-hanging yet important fruit that have to be addressed. And I wanted to make sure that there wasn't anybody on the committee that felt uncomfortable with potentially up to like 8 to 10 different zoning amendments on the same warrant as the MBTA communities zoning amendment. So the first one on the list, we already gone over, MBTA communities district and bylaw. The second one, I understand that the zoning review committee has already asked the select board to address the rezoning of parcels along Kendall Road. If you had any specific requests or feedback or anything you'd like me to provide to the planning board, please feel free to share them here tonight. I'll briefly pause to see if anybody had any comments that they'd like me to convey or Chaz to convey to the planning board.
Well, as you know, Eric, you and I had discussed earlier in the week that, you know, I've always felt that this board or this committee really is reviewing existing bylaws, and that new bylaws we really wanted to, you know, push off to the committees that they belong to or the boards that they belong to. And then if those boards think that it's something we should look at or try and move forward to with, or try to come up with language, then maybe we would look at them at that point.
Sure.
So
Okay.
I think that that's kind of the best way to handle it. I don't know how anybody else feels, but Eric Eldridge, how do you feel about that? Does that sound like the best way to do it, or?
So I agree with you 100%. I think it's one of those items where I think our charter is really to look at the zoning bylaws and at a high level, and you know how they're constituted, what sections are there. But some of these ones where we're talking about individual changes to the like parcels and things like that, unless there's something where the town owns them and you know there's other folks, I would feel more comfortable having the request coming from the planning board to say, hey, this is causing us some pain. We think that this should be done. And, you know, certainly that would be something that the select board would be amenable to, as far as putting them on the warrant if the planning board felt that now was the right time to do that.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I really think that these should come from the boards into our domain to be looked at and moved on or not moved on. Larry, your comments?
100% on board with reviewing, with the majority of our focus being reviewing the existing bylaws.
Joe, any thoughts? You're muted, by the way.
Same. I agree.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yes.
the only thing I would say is relative to that, and just to be clear, I think when we get down to some of the other items, when we're talking about the AG's office explicitly told us that we need to fix certain things in our bylaws in order to accept a bunch of these other things. I think that is within our purview to make those recommendations, but that the individual parcels and things like that, I don't think so.
No
Well, yeah,
problem.
I think that's exactly what we're saying, is we
Yep.
really should be looking at existing bylaws, not looking at new potential ones with this committee, so. Okay. Do we want to go over each one of these items? The
Well,
rezoning, Kendall
yeah, I
Road?
mean, I'll make sure that we don't spend that much time on each individual item, but I do want to say that the inclusionary zoning bylaw is an existing one. I invite members of the zoning review committee to review, take a look at any of that where you feel like there's specific sections that need revisions. I'm specifically talking about and looking at section 9.1 is inclusionary zoning. The methods of providing affordable units is part C. And what I'd be suggesting is removing the donation of land as an acceptable substitute for the inclusionary zoning requirement, as well as ensuring that any contributions in lieu with regards to financial payments were adequate enough and or only for small enough projects that they wouldn't have a large impact on the town's SHI. And that's about it. So I know that there probably won't be tons of discussion. I've heard enough feedback from folks in town amongst various boards that I'm pretty confident that that's the direction that folks want to go in. And you know, as we come up with some adjustments to that, I'm assuming that the zoning review committee would like the chance to take a look at that before making the suggestion and the request to the planning board to put it or to then, I guess, approve it or request that it be included on the town warrant for Springtown meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should take a look at that one.
Okay.
Take some time to discuss that now, or do we want to just run through this list and maybe come back to it, or depending on how much time we have left?
Yeah, we can come back to it if there's time. Otherwise, you know, folks can make a specific note to go back and look at that and send me any potential revisions, suggestions, or schedule a conversation with regards to what you think might be helpful. Otherwise, I'll be taking a stab at it and we can review it as language gets created.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I might,
Mhm.
because I know we've talked about some of these things, but I think we've talked about them in a high level. And Eric, you've got a lot more background from hearing from others as to where the challenges are. I think it would be great to have an understanding of what some language might look like so that we understand, okay, what are we talking about changing here to weigh in on that, rather than each of us trying to come up with, you know, a whiteboarding it and saying, well, I think it should say this. If you could provide us with an, you know, some sort of language, doesn't have, you know, obviously we'd want council to review it before we did anything final, but at least covering, you know, we think we need to change it so that it doesn't, you know, it removes this item and it adds this. That way I think it would make it easier on, I know it'd be easier on me.
Sure. While we're on this topic, I can pull up the zoning review and I can get a little bit of that conversation going right now, if that's what you'd like, Mr. Chair.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay. All right, page 72. So for anybody following along in the video, this is section 9.1, part D, so of the inclusionary zoning bylaw. The planning board is the permit granting authority, understood, but it's the execution of the payment of a fee in lieu to the town. The question is 16 units or less the appropriate number in which the threshold is available for a payment in lieu, or should that number be lower? And I felt like the town got itself into, I don't want to say a little bit of trouble, but the interpretation of the donation of developable land is one of the pieces of the town zoning bylaw that made it difficult to interpret about what the responsibility would be for the development at the Toll Brothers at the golf course. So when the golf course was converted from one non-conforming use to another, the question was, well, if we're donating land, is that good enough? And are we really even subject to this? So I wanted to address some of the confusion and some of the hard feelings that people had. Now, granted, the town came out of that process, I want to point out, with a very good solution. I'd like to compliment Toll Brothers and the planning board, as well as the attorneys that have been involved, that came up with what we referred to as the Affordable Housing Facilitation Agreement, which has resulted in the under current construction of 16 apartment units that'll be in some pretty handsome buildings, 4 of which will be deeded as affordable in perpetuity. So the town came out with a great solution, but it was a long path forward, and there's no guarantees that the path is going to have the same results moving forward. So the question is, can we plug some of those loopholes and or questionable areas with some revisions to the inclusionary bylaw? The other portion is the contribution in lieu of on-site units for a cash payment made to the Affordable Housing Trust, and using the total residential development cost limit as articulated in DHCD's qualified allocation plan, et cetera. I'd like to look to see if there's language that might be more appropriate and maybe less prone to editing. For instance, the state decided to call the department something besides DHCD now. So it's just a terminology that we might have to edit, but is there anything else that we could use that better describes what needs to be done? And is the town even interested in receiving payment in lieu? Since the town has an affordable housing trust, I think that it's still appropriate. Those funds could be well used. The question is, we need to make sure that the amount is sufficient enough to construct the same number of affordable units that would have been required to be constructed to begin with.
So I wouldn't mind seeing some sort of formula if we are going to accept payment in lieu. My number one thing would be not to accept any payment in lieu and make them build them. But maybe if we do have to, by law, accept some kind of a payment in lieu, then we need to make sure we're getting enough to actually build something down the road. And maybe it should be 1.5 times whatever the unit would normally be, just to throw out a number. I don't know how anybody else feels about payment in lieu, but it just seems like, I know with Toll Brothers, yes, we ended up okay with them, but certainly not based on what the price of those units are and what should have been affordable, we didn't get anywhere near that. And because the whole thing was kind of put to us as one from
Conforming
one
law.
type of zoning to another non-conforming use, we really ran into a real hornet's nest with that one. I mean, if we're talking about $800,000 homes that we were supposed to be compensated for, we certainly didn't get anywhere near that. So I think we need to come up with some kind of a formula built into this if we are going to accept payment in lieu. Any other comments from the board?
No, I agree with that. And I would be curious to get the planning board's feedback, as the permit granting authority, and having gone through one of these situations, because all 3 of the changes I think are good ideas. Tighten up some of the language. Let's just make sure that what we look to do makes it better for the planning board versus making it more difficult to accomplish those goals.
Larry, any thoughts?
Not at this time. I'm going to remain quiet on this one.
All right. Joe, your thoughts?
My thoughts are, as more developments come in, there's going to be less developable land. It's going to be harder and harder to meet this criteria.
Which criteria?
All of them. Developable land, number 2, contribution in lieu on-site units. They're not going to want to do that. It's going to be more and more difficult, as we currently see in the current projects.
Right. I definitely agree that this language about the donation of developable land makes it extremely hard for the town to get the affordable housing constructed. And to be honest, after reading through all of this, I would suggest striking all of D2.
So get rid of the developable land then. Make
Yeah,
that,
how do you really make it work, right? I mean, it's really just land. The town has land, so if the town's initiative was to build affordable housing, great. Like the Affordable Housing Trust, if it found enough funds, could go move forward with a project. And the Affordable Housing Trust is trying to acquire land from Mass Dot specifically for that purpose. But to receive land in exchange for the affordable units that the inclusionary bylaw was intended to create, it's hard for me to see a path forward to getting to those actual units. Payment in lieu with a formula like Chaz had mentioned, the chair had mentioned, with the right formula that could work, where if those funds got put into place with the Affordable Housing Trust, the Affordable Housing Trust has other options besides new construction to create affordable units. So it could be revising or renovating existing housing. It could be to support members of the community that are having difficulty affording or buying their first home. There's a lot of different things that those funds could be put towards that either have an impact on the subsidized housing inventory or just making housing generally more affordable in town, even if it doesn't have an impact on the SHI.
The criteria that we should be looking at all three of these categories is how does it help us keep our 10% or better? And if it comes so cumbersome on our part to keep our 10%, then we really have to have a critical eye on this.
Sure. I mean, I guess
We're
my
not going to
point.
win.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part I was talking about.
We're not going to win at this. It will get depleted, and we're going to run out of our 10%.
which brings me back to my original point was, I don't particularly like taking money or land for either one of these. I'm of the opinion that the builder should build them, and that's that. So we always end up on the short end of the stick with this, and if we were to just eliminate payment in lieu and developable land, unless there's some kind of a state law that makes us have that in there,
No, there isn't.
then I'd be up for striking the whole thing and just
Yep.
ensure that the developer is.
This has to be tightened up. Yep.
So. Anybody else have any thoughts before we send Eric to the drawing board? All right, seeing none, let's move on.
Very good. Probably no need for discussion with regards to making farmers markets and farm stands a general license. I'm embarrassed to say that I'm still having some difficulty chewing through the language for the battery energy storage systems, but I'll be working on that. And it's really not going to be up to the zoning review committee. It's a new bylaw. It would be up to the planning board and public safety, the fire department. And the question is on the last bullet item in that first section, adding a continuing care campus to the B2 district. Technically, that's a modification of our existing bylaw. And I just I can pull up our GIS map and show how many parcels within the B2 district are above 4 acres. There's really not very many. There's only two non-town owned parcels that qualify, and it would be the Van Alst property that is right behind the existing town offices, and the property that is at 84 Kendall, which is across the street from Bryant Lane across Kendall Road. And the reason I bring it up, there have been inquiries for potential continuing care campus development at 84 Kendall, and we can entertain those proposals and inquiries with a change in the zoning. I thought that it would be potentially a good addition near the town center.
We can discuss that at the planning board next Thursday, right?
Sure.
Anybody else have any comments on switching the zoning for that? Joe?
No comment.
I saw you come off of mute, so I thought you might have something. All right, let's move on to the next group here, which we strongly recommended required amendments from the Attorney General.
Thanks. Sure. I did actually have an opportunity to talk to town council to clarify some of the items between must and recommended and what I've been reviewing with town council on the second page of the agenda. The first two, as the chair mentioned, are must do's, and they're very simple. They're striking the town meeting accrual requirements from the multifamily and open space residential development components. And the Attorney General's office also said that they rejected or had stricken the town's specific prohibition of solid waste disposal in the industrial district. So those two items need to be in the meeting warrant, town meeting warrant. Any
Yep.
questions about those?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I'm just trying to figure out, because we're going to have a lot of warrant articles. Should we bundle those and maybe the next one in there to sit there and just say, look, there's a couple of items where the Attorney General has already reviewed our bylaws, and these items are against Mass General Law. We need to clean them up rather than going into separate warrant articles. What I'm trying to do is not have 9 warrant articles on zoning, and are there ways, town meeting goes long enough as it is. My guess is that anybody that would object to these items is they're gonna object to anything that the state says. So we might be better off just trying to put them together and say, look, they've already said they're not gonna be taking our changes unless we fix this type of stuff. Let's fix it.
sure.
But on the other hand, if you bundle it up and somebody or there's a group that doesn't like one particular item, then they'll all get negated.
I'm not talking about all, I'm just talking about these items.
Yeah, well, I'm
These
saying
two.
I'd like to see them held separately. And are they against the law? Do we have a ruling from the Attorney General that we are in contempt or something like that? Or is the town going to be allowed to control itself in certain areas, especially where it felt burnt in the past, for instance, for a solid waste landfill or transfer state or whatever? And I believe part of that is that knee-jerk reaction where, they didn't want any part of it in the future. We don't want to take any kind of secondary effect from a similar Charles George landfill. And are we going to be usurping our town's rights? Maybe the town wants to keep the town meeting form of management on larger parcels. Right, so it would go to a vote and have a popular vote.
For the housing?
Yeah, for the housing.
Yeah, I would say,
Are you taking away people's ability now to have a say in their own government? Slowly, is it creeping up, right, from the state? We all know the state has been constantly bombarding us and groups like us in many different towns saying that we need more affordable housing. And at the same hand, we're listening every single day that we're getting more and more occupants to this country. Where are they going to go?
Sure. Can I reply to some of that, Mr. Chair?
Sure, please do.
Sure. So we've got 2 separate questions there. One of them would be I'll address it from what the state has said. So the state's MBTA communities bylaw legislation. The Attorney General has already been very explicit in multiple advisory memos saying that this is state law. If you do not pass the zoning, you will be out of compliance and breaking the law for the state statute. So there's really no question with regards to what needs to be done. It's just a matter of what language is your community going to pass. With regards to the 2 other items in this section about must remove town meeting approval requirements for multifamily and open space, that was the Attorney General's interpretation of compliance with federal law. So the Fair Housing Act is something that every community needs to be able to comply with. And the town meeting requirement there is in violation of the federal law. So they were advising that the town remove it. If the town
previously it was not 20 years ago, it was not in violation of federal law or state mandate, but now it is.
It was definitely not in violation of the state mandate. I'd have to look. I think the Fair Housing Act is from 1972, so I guess it's been in violation since then. And the state has already explained that if the town passes the MBTA communities zoning amendment but doesn't make these changes to the multifamily housing town meeting requirement, then we would also be out of compliance with the state regulations. So while I think there's some benefit of at least bundling the first 2 items because they essentially do the same thing. They're addressing the bylaw says that multifamily housing and open space residential development requires town meeting approval. The single amendment could potentially say we're striking it from both of those. Because if you're not striking one and then you're striking the other, it doesn't make any sense. So they'll either both not pass or they both will pass.
So I maintain that we change that wording so that it fits federal guidelines and state mandate, but still allows the town to have ultimate control over this in some manner, shape, or form.
I think that's why towns at the moment, I don't really see an adjustment to the language that still puts control of, residential development, where the special permit granting authority and/or zoning enforcement is with either the planning board, the ZBA, or the building commissioner, back into the hands of town meeting.
Mr. Chair, if I may get
Yeah,
a
go ahead.
clarification on this, because this was born out of the Attorney General's review of our bylaws submitted back in October of 2022. And they provided an extensive listing of those items, and they said, we accept everything except the items that we're talking about fixing here. Have we had council review? And I think, Joe, your point is, well, that's great. The Attorney General can say, well, we don't think that these comply with whether it's federal law or state mandate or whatever it is. Have we had council review to say that that's true, we agree with that? And is there something that could be changed in the wording or some other way to maintain the intent, which was to have the town have ultimate control over certain things? So Joe, is that correct?
Yes.
And then if so, Eric, have we had council look at it in that manner?
Well, council has most certainly reviewed the AG's, the Attorney General's response to the recodification. He and I specifically spoke about each line item. And up to this point, it seemed like everybody was in agreement that it would be in the town's best interest if they wanted to support the MBTA communities amendment that they've worked on, to also be striking the town meeting requirement for multifamily and open space residential development. I did share my screen with regards to the first paragraph in the Attorney General's response letter, which was received in September of last year, saying that the recodification was accepted, but there were two specific elements that were not accepted, specifically text prohibiting the solid waste facilities in the industrial district, and two, the requirement of town meeting approval because it's in conflict with state law. When we go down to some of their additional explanations, I believe they reference the Fair Housing Act.
So really, we don't have much choice but to at least put it on the town warrant. And then let's see what the voters say.
And if we could put those two subjects on separate warrants.
So
Not bundled.
multifamily and open space separately. Because what we just read did not include the open space development, did it, Eric?
I sent a communication back to the Attorney General asking about clarification on that, and they sent me back a message saying that it was in their error for omitting it.
Okay. So, Joe, would you be more comfortable with just with those two line items separately going through to the warrant, or would you want three line items for these two, one for multifamily and one for open space?
Well, the multifamily and open space could be on one.
Okay. And then the solid waste would be on the
Would be a separate, yeah.
the way we're looking at them on our agenda then.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can tell you,
Did the state attorney general cite law against having solid waste in your community in an industrial zone?
Yep, I can share it
Yeah.
on screen with you if you'd
I'd like
like.
to see that.
Okay, so disapproved text because of conflicts with state law, the state's prohibition on solid waste, or the section's prohibition on solid waste facilities. They're showing that it's prohibited in all zones, including the industrial district. They explain that they disapproved the prohibition because state law precludes towns from prohibiting solid waste facilities in industrial districts specifically. The Commonwealth has comprehensively regulated the siting of solid waste facilities in the state through general law, Chapter 48, Section 9, and Chapter 111, Sections 150A, and the solid waste management facility regulations found in 310 CMR, Section 19. And
So the state takes away all of the town's ability to regulate the location, and the state will actually give you the opportunity, or they will tell you where it's going to go through their regulation. So it strips away the community's right to define itself as to where and when and how, or if it will have a solid waste disposal facility.
You can make it by special permit. They were specifically saying that they were rejecting the prohibition of it. So they go on to say,
but it would be allowed under a special permit if it was to pass. And that would be a special permit granted by select board.
Let's see here.
Or planning.
A city or town shall not adopt an ordinance or bylaw prohibiting the siting of such a facility or the expansion of an existing facility on any locus that's zoned for industrial use, or require a license or permit granted by said city or town. So I was mistaken. Except a special permit imposing reasonable conditions on the construction or operation of the facility, unless such prohibition, license, or permit was in effect on or before July 1st. 1987, provided that, however, that a city or town may adopt and enforce a zoning or non-zoning ordinance. I'm reading this all off the AG's letter. I mean, if you'd like to review it, I'm happy to schedule.
Yeah, I'd have to look at this, but did we have in effect a prohibition before 1987? Probably, I don't know. I don't know if we did or not.
Well,
But it's saying instead of a special permit, yes or no, it's saying special permit to be granted on those reasonable conditions. So in effect, it would be granting the operation of a solid waste disposal or hazardous waste disposal or a battery recycling plant, a lithium ion battery, right? So this all comes together again. We're talking about battery storage. We're talking about hazardous waste. We're talking about recycling facilities.
I think solid waste disposal is different than hazardous material.
It's a narrow leap. It's a short leap. Solid waste, I believe, encompasses certain hazardous materials, just by definition. It's an over-encompassing umbrella.
Okay.
So it sounds like, if I might, Mr. Chair,
Most of this community is on well water. It's on its own well water system. We don't have townwide water. We have to protect our aquifer, right? So anything that would, even the runoff on some of the farms that you smell in the spring when the ice melts in the brooks and it's going to our waterways. We spent many, many millions of dollars to sewer communities around lakes to protect them from the eutrophication, the contaminants that would go in and actually force the continued growth of algae blooms, of non-native plants in the waterways. Now we're allowing the same type of material from these facilities that we currently have to flow into the waterways and contaminate. So you have to have an all-encompassing plan. We can't piecemeal it together because it just doesn't work, right? So if we just come off of the Charles George landfill and it's a federally funded hazardous waste site that we all remember well and we grew up with, do we really want to get into that business as a small farming community again?
Well,
I hate to say it's NIMBY, it's not in my backyard, but hey, We've been through this before, and now we've got the state telling us again what we can and cannot do, and they're gonna actually legislate this and tell us what we have to do. There's a time where we have to take ownership of this as a town.
Eric, can you talk to town council about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I have spoke to town council. You'd be the town would be in compliance if the prohibition letter O in the use table was changed to special permit, which puts it within the purview of the planning board. I mean, you could technically choose to make it a special permit by the select board, but either way, as long as it's not a prohibition, I think it would satisfy the Attorney General's requirement. They do cite specific case law as well as state law that explains why having it explicitly prohibited is not lawful. I think it's difficult for a planner to go in and explain or justify the maintenance of an unlawful handling of a use within its zoning bylaws, especially when the town's already been pointed out the violation, I guess, by the Attorney General. If you decide not to make any change and just ignore the advisory letter from the Attorney General and it remains prohibited, and then there is an application or something else, and there is a lawsuit with the town about it not being allowed, it does become difficult for the community to claim that it was either unaware or something else with regards to finding a process forward. I'd say the special permit process gives the community an opportunity to voice its concerns and protect its natural resources and the health of its residents. So you could have reasonable conditions imposed on a special permit there that incorporate features for a solid waste facility in order to.
Can you go back to that particular paragraph again? I'd like to just highlight what is allowed as a facility a little bit more. Okay, so a facility, a sanitary landfill, a refuse transfer station, a refuse incinerator rated by the department at blah, 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 a resource recovery facility. That's a very broad umbrella, right? A refuse composting plant, of which we have at least one in operation currently, a composting plant. We do. A dumping ground for refuse or any other works for treating, storing, and disposing of refuse. We have that also in town. Those are ongoing permitted activities that have been permitted by the state. The state is actually promoting that. That's why they don't like our law. But somehow those operations are in operation today.
Could we go one step further? So Eric, they said we can't have the O.
Right.
We could do special permit where the planning board or select board has the authority to grant it, and that would be in compliance according to what they're talking about. Could we go one step further though and say that the town, we'd have to have a town meeting, approve it? And it's not a no, right? Because they're objecting to the O.
I highly recommend not trying to go down that path. You really don't want your zoning to be, you don't want town meeting to be your special permit granting authority. It's just not an efficient or adequate process. The whole point of your zoning bylaw is to empower a specific board that is elected by the public to enforce the regulations that the town has passed already. So
if the town never has any recourse to have its principal uses delineated by this zoning bylaw? Or does everything have to be voted on by a planning board or a zoning board? And for instance, under principal uses, that should probably be corrected also. We should have a line item for solid waste, a line item for recycled material, food wastes. We ought to have a line item for incinerator. Everything that they delineated in that other paragraph should have a line item.
But
so
if
I agree.
It's all by special permit, wouldn't it just be summarized by special permit?
It might be, but I think, Joe, I'm with you on this because one of the things, Eric, I completely understand what you're saying, and we don't want to have the bylaws be subject to, town meeting. However, there are some things, as Joe talked about, There are some things that we're particularly sensitive about that we can't just ignore. And we could sit there and say, look, I get it. We're not putting an O in there. It's not completely prohibited. However, you need to understand we already have a Superfund site in town, and we're very sensitive that we don't want to have one of those in there in an industrial location, regardless of, you know, what the state might put in for and what we might be able to do for reasonable stipulations on that permit. And that's where I look at it and say, okay, we'll put it to town meeting vote. Because then I know some people sit there and say, hey, I don't want to worry about, you know, 5 or 7 people who could be convinced to grant something like this. We sit there and say, put it in the hands of the residents as part of town meeting. I'd be curious to see whether council looks at that and says, that would be a reasonable way. And we could even run it past the AG and said, I know you said this, but here's what we're trying to get to.
And we've been down that road, and
So this group wanted an O. And we can't have that because of the Attorney General. It makes sense to come as close to an O as we possibly can, which means throw as much at it as we possibly can, which means make it have to get through a town meeting. So
well, it is an O. It is an O now. The state attorney general looked at when they were reviewing. So we sent them some changes to specific sections of our bylaws, and they looked at all of it, and that's where they found these items.
Right. So if we can't do that, then the idea of having this go through a town meeting it's a great idea, because it allows us possibly to be in compliance with the Attorney General and still have multiple defensive mechanisms that would come into play if this actually came up and someone really wanted to do this in Tyngsborough.
Or we create a new parcel where we have, we take away the O. And yeah, we can and put in an incinerator for hazardous medical waste, for instance. But it's so onerous that nobody will ever put a plant there. But then the state will come back and they'll say, you've made it too onerous. That is not possible. Change your wording of this, change your regulation. Comes a certain point where there has to be a little bit of pushback, even at the AG, even to the AG level. If they don't understand that we've gone through this in the past with disastrous results for a lot of people, then they just don't understand. You have to make them understand.
I couldn't agree with you more, Joe. Let's, Eric, why don't we ask town council if in fact we can put it before town meeting, because that would certainly kill it. And if not, then maybe we can have town council sort of represent us in some sort of a discussion with the Attorney General, explaining the Superfund site and why Tyngsborough has already done and taken the risk and felt the repercussions from this. And we don't want to be put in that position again.
And I will say that bundling the items helps get town meeting to go, because I don't want to have the same debate over all 9, you know, as long as we're covering different things. However, Joe, based on what you said and what we're talking about here, if we are talking about changing it from an O to whatever, I'm fine with having it be separate. I agree that it's not something that we should bundle with the others. We can keep the multifamily and the open space one as one. This be a separate item, because it is a different discussion initiated by the same AG review, but a different discussion. And I'll just tell the board that we'll have more than the 5 articles that I thought we might have more.
Eric Solano, how, are we under the gun to have this all on our docket for town meeting? All these suggestions that we have to comply with? Or
Well,
can we?
I can get to the other ones. These
No,
first,
I wanna, before we move on from the solid waste,
right.
can we just let them know where this is in discussion and we're working with town council to try and figure out the best route forward for this one? Or is it all or nothing? I mean, how can we work this so that we can have some time beyond town meeting to discuss this as a town?
Right. I think you're under the gun for the first bullet item for your town meeting approval requirement for multifamily. So if you're putting the MBTA community zoning amendment before town meeting in May,
Yep.
you absolutely need to have that on your town meeting warrant as well. If you're still looking for more time, or there's not enough time to come up with a proposal or get an answer that makes the zoning review committee and or planning board feel comfortable about a response for the solid waste component, I would say that, you've got time to come up with some sort of solution. Nothing bad is going to happen to the town in the meantime. There's no threats from the town or anything else. Town council might be able to better explain what it means to the town to have the attorney general's letter come back and say, well, we are striking that. Oh, like, what does that actually mean in the time being until an amendment to that table of uses can be put to town meeting. But I don't think you're looking at, these giant applications coming forward for solid waste facilities being proposed. So I would say that you're not under the gun for that.
Then let's get town council involved in this and see if this, let's get his advice, to let him know we don't want to do this. And find out if there's some sort of way around it.
I'd be happy to.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, let's move on then to the third bullet item here in this section.
Sure. And I've tried to order the following bullets based on what I would consider, with maybe the exception of the greenhouses one. I tried to order them in terms of usefulness to clarity for the zoning bylaw itself. So while the AG's office pointed out the fact that the town's distance measurement definition doesn't match the language used by the regulations by the CCC, if the town decided to maintain its own language as of today, there's really no existing case law or decisions that have challenged those yet. Although there are some that are currently in litigation that could have an impact on an answer or town council's advisory to the community. However, I'd say it's a relatively minor item to distinguish between where you're measuring them from, which I think is currently the town's interpreting it as like edge of building to edge of building, and it's supposed to be from like the center of the entrance to center of the entrance. By making it match, the town basically is avoiding any discrepancies or confusion about why the town's not matching the CCC's same descriptions. So I thought it made sense to put it to town meeting to see if they wanted to make it match.
If I might,
Yeah,
Mr. Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a really minor thing, right? This is not a substantial, it's not like we're somehow making it so they can be 100 feet closer. It's a small thing. It's more of a bookkeeping item where we're just getting consistent with what the state law, unlike, some of these other things where it's a material change. Is that correct?
Correct. So we're not changing the distance whatsoever. It's just really a matter of what points are being used to measure in between. They did make some comments with regards to whether or not communities can establish buffers around areas of sensitivity, like daycare centers, churches, libraries, playgrounds, etc. When I reviewed that with town council a couple of days ago, he didn't necessarily agree with the AG's interpretation there. There's not any case law that says that you can't do that. And there's been other examples of similar types of legislation that does give discretion to communities to identify that. So he wasn't making any recommendations for item A. However, the 500-foot distance being measured in a straight line from building or facility, they're mentioning that let's see where they're right. So this is the language from the CCC's regulations, and E is the distance, is the language in our existing bylaw.
So have they changed? Are they relaxing this a little bit now by going to geometric center of the facility? So for instance, we have one legal establishment now, and we had proposed the second licensee to be a little more than they had to be 500 feet apart from corner of building closest to building. So for instance, the corner that's closest to the next site had to be 500 feet from corner of building to corner of building.
Right.
We ran into a problem with one facility. The owner did not want to modify the building to be in compliance with that 500-foot rule. Originally, the state mandate was 500 from corner of property line to corner of property line. Then the town of Tyngsborough thought that that might be too onerous. We backed down. We said, no, it'll be from the corner of the building to the corner of the building. So from one cannabis establishment to the next cannabis establishment, the closest corners had to be a minimum 500 feet apart. Now it looks like they're saying that the distance is going to be from the center, geometric center of the building to geometric center.
Of the entrance.
Geometric center of the entrance of each of the properties. So now they're relaxing it even further. Is that my interpretation of this?
Yeah, I don't have the history of the revisions that the CCC made. All I can do is offer up the existing regulations that are there.
Okay.
If the history that you just described, I don't have any reason to think that it's incorrect, then I guess your interpretation is correct in that if it's gone from parcel to building to entrance, technically they're getting slightly closer together, but I think it's more easily, I don't want to say more easily enforceable, but maybe more fairly enforceable based on different conditions.
So they're saying geometric center of the establishment entrance, marijuana entrance to the center of the nearest school entrance. But do they delineate, is there a difference that we're missing somehow from marijuana establishment to the next marijuana establishment? Is that going to also change? Is that going to go from the center, geometric center of the door of one establishment to the geometric center of the door of the next marijuana establishment? Or are we just talking from or is this specific from marijuana establishment to a school entrance? Because it could be totally different.
Well, can we back up just a little bit here, Joe? We have one existing. We have one that is approved, and it looks as though they've cleared out the old yellow house and are proceeding with building it.
Well, that was a different story. That where the yellow building was met the 500-foot rule.
Correct. So
Right.
just let me finish here, Joe, if I
Okay.
could. We only allow 2 in town.
Yes.
We will have our 2 when the second one is built.
Yes.
What do we care about this being 500 feet from the center of the door to the center of the door?
I'm just clarifying. I just want to know, because I want to know if they're relaxing the regulations even further from what we did. Again, the state had promoted the corner of the property line to the corner of property line. Tyngsborough thought that that was too onerous in the area that we were going to have them established. And we went from corner of building to corner of building, and that was okayed by the Cannabis Control Commission. Okay, now they have a specific statement in here that says from the geometric center of a door to the geometric center of a school. So that leads me to believe that that's even less onerous than what Tyngsborough has. We were talking establishment to establishment. They're talking establishment to a school, to a children's school. That's what That's what is curious. We've met our criteria with the yellow house. They were at they were beyond the 500 foot. The reason why the town was getting sued and the people that owned the yellow house got sued was because the town zoning board of appeals was going to grant them a variance for being under the required square footage for a B2 zone parcel. And that was going to go through, but the owners of the yellow house pulled the requirement right at the last minute before it went to a vote. And the first establishment decided to sue to hold up the second unit, the second establishment from going in, because I'm not going to say what I know what their reason is, but we can all guess that they probably did not want to have the competition. I'm probably saying too much right now about this whole concept. So what I'm interested in is we have a 500-foot rule from corner of building to corner of building. Now the Cannabis Control Commission says, well, let's make it from the center of the door to a school. I find that very offensive.
As do I.
Well,
And
Mr.
I
Chair, if I
also,
try to-
yeah, the other thing I would add on this is, I don't think that, it's a critical item. It wasn't one that they said, oh, you really need to change it, unlike some of the others. This was just one where they raised it where it might be a little bit different. I think that we took into account for ours, all buildings. And
we're nowhere near a school, so this doesn't apply to us. We don't have to worry about this at all. But we should
That's
probably
one of the
have the
points I was
wording
gonna
going
make, Joe.
forward if we ever have another establishment that's voted into town.
Well, that's the thing, and we
Yeah.
might not ever get beyond 2,
Exactly.
but we still could have this one could fall through,
Oh, yeah.
and somebody else, one of them might go away. One of them may say, "Hey, I'm going out of business," and it needs to be right, because we don't want to have to deal with this. I'm wondering if we shouldn't just table this, and because what we have is pretty darn close to what the CCC has, and my guess is that they may change a couple more times because it's already changed recently, and ours is certainly has that reasonableness to it.
They must have an awful lot of marijuana establishments going in next to schools. That's all I can say. Tyngsborough does not.
I would be happy to table this and do nothing with it, to be honest with you. As long as it's not required.
Yep, that's perfectly fine. The more time that you give it, the more case law you'd have to guide you with regards to any potential changes. As Joe mentioned, the letter that I have up on the screen here is pointing out that it's, I guess, the only section within the CCC's regulations that talk about any potential inconsistencies with regards to the measurement of distances is to the geometric center of a school, not cement. I'll admit I made a bit of a mistake in that I thought that it was discussing as well the measurement of distances between marijuana establishments, but that is not what it says here. So I don't think the town is in any specific danger. And even if you did have an application come forward before any changes were made to your zoning bylaw, and it just so happened that there was a discrepancy about how you'd be measuring the distance between the proposed marijuana establishment and an existing school, as long as you're enforcing it according to the same regulations that are in place, meaning you then chose to enforce 935, CMR 500, et cetera, where you were doing that measurement to the geometric center of the school entrance, you'd be in good shape, even if you didn't change your zoning bylaw. So I'm perfectly fine with tabling that one.
So are we in agreement to table this? I think we are. Larry, you're the only one that hasn't chimed in. Yeah,
In
okay.
agreement to table. Yep.
Yeah, let's take that one off the list. All right, turn the page.
All right, so on these other items, it's mostly the same type of conclusion that you just came to with regards to the advisory on the marijuana, and I did get clarity or clarifications from town council based on my questions about the following items, because I wanted to try to get an accurate interpretation of what the Attorney General was saying. When it comes to nursing homes, assisted living facilities, continuing care campuses, hospitals, et cetera, what town council explained to me was you essentially can't treat those types of uses or facilities differently mostly because they could include Americans with disabilities. But then his point was, I guess the AG had a reason to mention that in their letter, but what about some other use? Are you going to have to make sure you don't deny something else because of somebody with a disability? So in general, it was almost like a common sense implementation of the bylaw itself, and the AG wasn't specifically pointing out any shortfalls or problems with the language and the way that the town already has its zoning bylaw established in regards to those particular uses. So advisory, take it into consideration. I don't think the town is in any dire straits with regards to making a change. The next item under public or private utility facilities.
Let's stay with this for 1 second,
Yeah,
Eric, just
sure.
so I completely understand. So it need to apply zoning equally across districts? Does that mean we need to put these in any district
No,
or just B2?
everything's fine. You do not have to make any changes with regards to what districts it's permissible in or anything else. It's just a matter of essentially treating them fairly with regards to essentially applicants and reasons why there might be somebody with disabilities that would be using those facilities.
Okay.
But there's nothing that I think you can show. Nobody can sue the town saying, hey, you're really not fairly providing a place for nursing homes to go or assisted living facilities. Nursing homes themselves have their own legislation with regard and protections. I think the town's done a fine job already with regards to providing places and districts where these can go either by special permit or not.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Do we have a clear definition of what facilities means?
Assisted living facilities?
Yes.
Yes, so when in the zoning bylaw itself, assisted living facilities has a definition.
And could you tell us what that is?
I'd be happy to. An assisted living facility is a structure or structures owned by a single entity containing 4 or more dwelling units for persons in need of assistance with activities of daily living, as defined and regulated by General Law, Chapter 19D, Section 1, and 651 CMR 12.0, etc., or any successor statute or regulations. Assistance with activities of daily living include assistance with tasks related to bathing, dressing, grooming, ambulation, eating, toileting, and other similar tasks related to personal care needs. The facility may consist of, in 1 or more buildings, dwellings, common areas, including without limitation, central dining facilities, lounges, meeting rooms, laundry rooms, greenhouses, exercise rooms, and recreational areas, libraries, offices, and other common areas. Facilities and accessory uses for the residents or staff as may be desirable. Dwelling areas / units shall not include private kitchen or food preparation appliances such as a stove, but may include a kitchenette with a refrigerator, microwave, and hot plate. Shared living environment shall include shared dining facilities. That's the definition.
But it doesn't define the occupants and the people are going to be actually using that.
It does. It says it right in the very beginning. It's for people that need assistance with activities of daily living.
So, and where are they regulated to now? Anywhere in town, in any particular zone. So I just want to be careful if the wording isn't correct. So we could have, worst case scenario, a halfway house, a rehab house, a methadone clinic in a residential neighborhood, or people that are put there by the state that may be deemed needing care, especially, again, I'm going to reiterate the number of new occupants that we currently have in the country. This ties into the MBTA community and the building of all of the apartments and everything else. So we have to be very careful as how this is clearly defined. When we say assisted living facility, I think all of us first, in our minds, think of Aunt Martha, that is elderly and needs help and she's in a wheelchair and things like that. It has a very broad definition, a very broad umbrella. So we have to be very careful as to where these particular places are situated. Again, I think some of us have had that experience locally in Tyngsborough. maybe not recently, but in the recent past, of houses that that were assisted living. Just put it that way.
Right. Assisted living, by the way, is not permissible in all districts. It is only permissible by special permit in the B3 district. And this definition came out of the planning board's development of the continuing care campus bylaw, which is also continuing care campus is permissible in the same district, the B3 district, by
Yeah,
special permit.
I'm very leery about existing residential neighborhoods, residential areas, and importing something like that, depending on its use. Again,
Right. Group homes is
I have
something
no
that
issues with poor Aunt Martha, right? But
right. Group homes is something that is permissible by right, by state statute, and it's
Yes.
not even subject to special permit, obviously, but the assisted living is not something that's permissible within our residential districts.
thank you for the clarification. Thank you,
No
Eric.
problem.
Anybody else have any questions on this issue? Can we move on to the next item, which is public or private utility facilities? Eric, back to you then.
Sure. So the state has an agency that essentially identifies public utilities. There's relatively limited number of them that have been identified, but the Department of Public Utilities does that. Essentially, it was reminding the town that if that agency identified a public utility service, that you can't deny where it would like to be located. And it doesn't really require any changes to the zoning bylaw whatsoever, and doesn't really change anything with regards to the laws or the town's response. So that was a clarification for me from town council. And let me know if there's any questions.
So basically, these town council ones are really more for clarification for us and not necessarily action items for town meeting.
That's what I wanted to confirm with town council, because some of the legalese and the language that was in the attorney general's letter was not something I could come to a concrete conclusion with, and I wanted to have town council advise us. The letter from the attorney general's office says it on each item as well. You might want to review it with town council, and if it makes you feel any better, he did mention like municipalities get these letters from attorney general's offices all the time. He said, you know, you're one of the few people that have actually gotten in touch with town council for clarification. So thank you for that. So anyway, it's good that we're being thorough.
He also did say that we got free advice, so might as well take it.
Exactly. Yep. I mean, you can pretty much, the same answer goes through the remaining items. The last one really that makes sense to discuss, the last two are slaughterhouses and greenhouses. The slaughterhouses advisory, I was refuting the analysis from the Attorney General's office that was saying that maybe slaughterhouses are protected under agricultural uses, section 3 of chapter 40A. And my answer was, no, I think the community is really just prohibiting slaughterhouses as a facility, but we're not preventing any agricultural uses from performing slaughter-related operations if that's where the animals came from. So, you know, and town council tended to agree. So we didn't think that there was any necessary changes associated with that. So the prohibition of those does not require any editing. And then greenhouses, on the other hand, we did think was kind of an interesting one, and could potentially be problematic. But interestingly enough, the Attorney General's office did not flag it as something that they outright rejected. Greenhouses are something that is protected under Section 3 of Chapter 40A, and as an accessory use, even under agricultural items, the current bylaws requirement for special permits is potentially not enforceable if somebody challenged it. But the Attorney General wasn't specifically stipulating or instructing the town to make the correction.
But it's not, if I'm not mistaken, the planning board or nobody has flagged this as being an item that we should look at because it's a problem. It's just something where it hasn't really come up. It could be an issue, could not be an issue, no big deal.
Correct.
All right, so this section here with the town's council, these are not action items for us. This is just purely information for them.
Correct. And while you might think, oh, did Eric waste all of our time tonight discussing all these things that he just reviewed with town council? I hope that you don't feel that way, because it was part of the Attorney General's response to the recodification. I'm hoping that the committee feels like you've gotten to close the loop on some of those items and know that you can move on, and not worry about them anymore.
And that is how I feel. So,
Okay.
yeah, thank you for following up with town council on these.
No, we have to pay attention to the details and this is
Yep.
just, it comes with the territory. We have to do it.
The devil is in the details, absolutely. All right, let's move on to the engaging with Barrett counseling group. Or consulting group.
Sure. So I did start the process. I've been in touch with Judy Barrett of Barrett Planning Group. We do have some funds that have been approved. We're sitting in the town's accounts. There's some funds that are left that we could use with her consulting group to make some additional modifications to the zoning bylaw. As an economic development director, I do want to respond to the business community's request that there be revisions and discussion about making the sign regulations A, more business friendly, and B, easier to read. Right now, you kind of have to go through, like if you want all of your answers for district, whatever, B3 district, there might be a reference to, oh, it's everything in the, residential district plus this other thing. So being able to summarize what you can and cannot do in each district on their own, hopefully in some sort of tabular format, I think we could reduce a large portion of the text down to something that's a little bit more easily enforceable. Even if you don't make any changes to the regulations whatsoever, just make them easier to read, similar to the recodification, that would be progress made. But once it's organized, you could also potentially find opportunities for some adjustments to make it slightly more business friendly, i.e., maybe there's certain areas where signs could potentially be larger, or maybe you come up with a formula that comes up to what size sign works based on the speed of the traffic in front of the road, things like that. I'm not saying one or the other. It's just a discussion and
Or
evaluation.
distance from the road. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a good component to be spending some of those funds on, and just confirming with the zoning review committee that I can move forward with that.
Joe, this always falls into your lap. How important is it on a scale of 1 to 10 to you guys to get this squared away?
It's a good 8.5.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Is it the top of your list?
It's
said it was an 8.5.
pretty high up there. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have funds to do both of these things, Eric, or just one?
I think that we could probably get them both done. Because she specifically asked, well, was there anything else in addition to the signs that you'd like us to address? And then the second bullet item here is where I felt like the town could get the most bang for its buck with regards to improvements to zoning that would have a positive impact on the tax revenue and the economic development within the community, which is to look at the mixed use zoning language, where currently there's limited amount of acreage in town where that zoning applies, and we just lost a significant portion of it at 50 Westford Road, where the BAPS religious campus will be going. Also, the language in the mixed use overlay district is somewhat limited, and I think there's an opportunity to get a little bit more creative and apply it in other areas in town where it could make some wonderful spaces for people to live and help support the commercial and retail entities, similar to our MBTA community's response, but maybe with a little bit more commercial tax base, which I think fits the priorities of the Tyngsborough community.
Well, I think if we need to prioritize, then I think probably the sign regulation would be the first one, and the mixed use would probably be the second one. Does everyone agree with that? Okay, all right, so let's move on with that one then.
Very good.
So let's just kind of go back real quick here and see exactly what we're looking at to try and put on town meeting. It seems to me, from what I'm looking at, we have four definites at this point: the MBTA community, the farmers market to a special permit, the removal of town meeting for the multifamily and open space, and I guess we're still struggling with the solid waste, so we'll keep that off. So we really have three amendments that we would want to put onto our warrant. Everyone agree with that, or what are we looking at here?
I
Yeah,
counted a
three
lot.
or four. 3 or 4, because it would be, if we can figure out, is there a way that we could have the solid waste not be an O, but still have it be something where the town has say through town meeting?
Right.
So correct me if I was wrong, Mr. Chairman. I counted the potential with the planning board support on some of them.
Yeah, and you're right, Eric. I haven't gotten that far yet, but.
Oh,
but-
okay, okay.
but-
Like, basically, it's the first 8 bullets that I thought were in contention.
Yeah, but with the definite ones would be the MBTA community, the farmer's market, and the removal of town meeting approval. Those three definitely. If we can come up with something for solid waste, that would be the fourth one. And then depending the planning board review and what they might want to do, we could potentially have 3 more. And I guess also depending on how you make out with the inclusionary zoning, whatever you want to write up for that. I just think to try to get 8 in and then I don't know what we would do in October at this point. I mean, I'm sure we can find something. But do we want to not overwhelm the town meeting with 8? Do we want to pick 5 or 6 that we really want to focus on to make sure that we can, put together a good enough presentation for town meeting? And to back up just one more step, Selectman Eldridge, what are you looking at? Is how many town warrants are you potentially seeing for town meeting?
So we just opened the warrant a week and a half ago, and so I haven't seen anything. We were trying. Zoning is the big one, right? So I think if you think about who's going to be showing up, it's going to be for zoning related items. Plan accordingly. I don't expect a lot from what we've heard. There's not going to be a lot of stuff, other things. It's going to be the usual. It's going to be the budget. It's going to be some capital items, the normal day to day. But I think the non-operational types of things is going to be around zoning.
So you don't see any big controversial middle school safety building?
Nothing like that. No,
Okay.
there's nothing like that. I mean, I think the MBTA one is probably going to be the highest profile one from what I've heard. And obviously we don't have any visibility to citizens petitions, but that's what I know so far.
Okay, all right. So then we really do have some room to try and put some things on the warrant article for May then.
Great.
Yeah, I think the only challenge would be, and I think, Mr. Chair, you hit the nail on the head. What will we have time enough to make sure that our message is very clear for everybody, exactly what's changing? I think that as we've seen, when residents are well educated on exactly what's changing, and we let them know up front, they're very accepting of changes, because they make sense to us. But if we try to throw a whole bunch of things and it's a little bit haphazard, it may not work in our favor in that case. Just confuse people.
All right, so as a board, then let's try and figure out exactly what we want to prioritize of these 8 items, assuming planning board is going to go along with all these as well. If we want to try and put 8 articles on, MBTA communities is a must, in my opinion. Moving the farmers market and stands to a general license, I think that's an easy one for the town to understand and go for. At least one of the compliances for the removal of town meeting. We may see a battle on that. I don't know, but I think we really need to try and get that one on based on what the Attorney General has to say. Solid waste, I really am not. I don't see the town approving that in its current form. I don't think this town wants to see anything as far as solid waste ever again. whether we're in compliance with the Attorney General or not. So I think really we ought to just leave that one off no matter what comes up. If we can install the Attorney General as long as we possibly can, even though we are out of compliance. So those are the two or three big ones, I guess, that really we can count on putting on. Do we all agree on that?
That, if I'm not mistaken, there were 4 there, right? There was the MBTA,
Yep.
the inclusionary zoning cleanup.
Okay, we can count that one, but we're certainly gonna need to see some language on that.
Yeah. But that sounded like that was painful right now, that, you know, there was some things in there that we just need to
Yeah.
pull the language together. Farmers
Yeah.
market, farm stands, and then the multifamily and open space. Those were the 4 that I heard were, you know, we should work to get those on there. And then the others were either dependent on, you know, what planning board said, and whether, because there's another 4 items on there that are kind of secondary.
Right, so let's at least focus on those 4. To have those on. We'll see what the planning board comes up with on Thursday night next week. And we'll see how easy it would be to do whatever they would like us to do at our next meeting. But we definitely have 4 solid ones.
I was just bringing it up on screen in case people were following along and wanted
Yep.
to see. But very good.
So I think we're in agreement for those 4. We'll see what the planning board comes up with next Thursday, and when we meet again on whatever day that is gonna be next month.
Let me pull it up.
So we're the 2nd Tuesday, right?
Yeah, I think we're on March 12th.
So it'll be March 12th. So we get together again on March 12th. We'll have answers from the planning board, and Eric, you'll have some new language for the inclusionary zoning.
Yeah, I mean, based on the discussion tonight, a large portion of it is either striking quite a bit and not adding any language, or striking some and then potentially considering an alternative language for something that if you did allow a certain payment in lieu cash.
Well, my opinion, as we've mentioned earlier, I don't want payment in lieu.
At
I
all.
don't want land.
Mhm.
I want them to build, so. I think that was sort of the agreement of the 4 of us. So it's really more eliminating almost that entire section.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, okay. So then I think that absolutely we're ready to put that one on then. So we've got 4 definites, and we'll figure out the rest on March the 12th. This has been a very good meeting. Anybody else have anything else that, I mean, I feel like we've accomplished quite a bit. Anything else anybody wants to bring up before we look for a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion in a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Sounds good. All right, we'll see us all on March the 12th at 6 o'clock.